Hi, I'm Elisa Uusimäki, and today I'll introduce you to Professor Petri Luomanen and his research group. Petri serves as the Professor of New Testament and Early Christian Culture and Literature here at the University of Helsinki. He's also the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Theology and the leader of the Academy of Finland funded project Early Christianity in Cultural Evolution. Let's begin with reviewing Petri's career. Petri, would you tell us about your very first research project, when it took place, what it was about, and how you came to work on it?
Yes, perhaps one can name as a research project the doctoral thesis. Although in my case, the actual process began earlier, since the topic was the same that I had in my master's thesis. I was doing my master's thesis under the guidance of late Professor Heikki Räisänen. And when I started the seminar, Heikki had given some topics, possible topics for the attendees of the seminar, and he had marked with asterisk, with star, some topics that would also provide basis for postgraduate studies. And I was interested in postgraduate studies at that point, and then I chose a topic with Matthew's view of salvation. It's a pretty large topic, and actually a theological one to start with. So it took some time for me to finish the project, master's thesis, licentiate thesis, and the doctoral thesis on that topic.
Thanks, that's an interesting story. You're a prolific scholar and have worked on many other topics since then. How did you decide to expand your expertise as a postdoc?
Yes, when I was finishing my doctoral thesis, that was in the mid of 1990s, and that was the time when the new understanding of early Judaism was becoming largely accepted. And since I had been working with Heikki Räisänen, who was a close friend with E.P. Sanders, so we had been involved with that process of trying to understand Judaism, early Judaism, in a different way, and of course, in my case, because I was studying Matthew, that was also related that how to understand the Jewish character of Matthew's Gospel in light of this new picture of Judaism. And then I wanted to make use of my expertise as a Matthean scholar, but also to enlarge my expertise at that point. And I was figuring that many people were already starting to do some re-evaluation of New Testament writings in the light of new understanding of Judaism, so that perhaps it would be wise to do something else also. And then I came with the idea about studying early Jewish Christian groups that the church fathers considered as heretics. That in practice proved my interest to later times, to study of church fathers until the 4th century and so on. So that I thought that would be a appropriate topic for a postdoc project to enlarge the area of expertise towards that direction.
Yes. The period as an early career researcher is really crucial in one's academic life. Do you have any general tips for doctoral students who are completing their degrees and embarking on the academic journeys?
Yes, I think that phase in academic career is becoming more and more important, because doctoral studies are expected to be completed faster than earlier, when it took some 10 to 20 years. And also the requirements is, for instance, in Helsinki for completing a doctoral degree, they have been lightened so that not so much other courses have to be taken. So that puts more weight on the postgraduate phase of studies, and I think that's an important phase where one would benefit from enlarging one's areas of expertise, possibly both in terms of the topics and also methodological approaches. So, and I think it would also be very good if one could think one step ahead what's happening, try to follow what's happening in the field. And of course, one can do a significant career by doing something that all the others are just now beginning to do. But if one would manage to do something that others are not yet doing, that would be even better, but very difficult. I don't know if I've been able to accomplish that myself, but I've been trying to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned methods, so let's turn to them now. Later on, you have become known for your use of social scientific approaches. How did you end up working on such models, and how have they changed our notion of early Christianity?
Already in my doctoral thesis, I was already applying a little bit of two methodological currents that were important, in my view, important in the mid of 1990s in biblical studies, namely narrative and literary critical approach, and on the other hand, social scientific approach. And towards the end of the process of writing the thesis, then I started to think which way to go. Would I invest more on narrative, literary studies, or social scientific studies? I found that at that point I decided that it's social scientific studies that I would be going for, since that approach was closer to my heart in the sense that I've been all the time motivated by the question how it all came about, how Christianity was born, and how did it spread. So that social scientific studies gave more tools for that, although I've kept also an eye on narrative approach and trying to combine those both studies. And I think that contribution of social scientific studies is that it also there are two currents in social scientific studies. That we can call it social historical approach, which gives us better understanding of the contemporary culture and history of the time when New Testament was written, and on the other hand, the theoretical approach, which applies theories and models, which also give us more tools to understand the past societies and relate that understanding to our present understanding of Christianity and Judaism and other religions.
Yeah. Many find the use of theories that are developed in other fields very helpful, but others have accused them of being too reductive. How do you see the value of social scientific theorizing in biblical studies? Meanwhile, what kind of caution is needed when we introduce these kinds of models?
Yeah, there are two points that are presented as a defense of using social scientific modeling or theories in the study of early Christianity. The first is that the models and theories are used only as heuristic tools, and so they open new questions and direct our research to areas that we would not have come to think about without these theories. And the other one is that it's always better to be explicit with one theories and concepts than just try to ignore the whole problem, because there is always the problem when we study ancient societies that we have to use concepts that are understandable to us and make it possible for us to pursue objectivity. And on the other hand, they have to also be able to do justice to the ancient societies and ancient people's understanding of themselves. And that is precisely, as I also think that is the point of caution, how to try to balance these two things. And for me, one additional thing, and also one additional point of view to be added as a defense of using these, is that I've been interested in combining social scientific approach with cognitive approach, which sort of bridges our understanding of present society and ancient societies, since human cognition hasn't changed much. It actually hasn't changed at all during the past 2,000-3,000 years.
Interesting. So as I already mentioned, your current project, which is funded by the Academy of Finland, focuses on cultural evolution in early Christianity. How did you start to work on this topic, and how does the project move us forward?
Well, it's been growing from my interest in cognitive science of religion, where especially in the first phases, the considerations about evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology played a crucial role. And so the question about evolution is they're always present on some level, although I think that evolutionary psychology is not so useful in many cases. It's just sort of background information, interesting background information, but what is important is the way how mind functions now and 2,000 years. So, but in any case, so that brings up the question about evolution, and there have been also approaches that have addressed the birth of religion in general, and also the birth of Christianity from this evolutionary point of view. To name some, of course, Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and persons like that are sort of on the negative side of things when think about the role of religion in evolution. But on the other hand, there have been more positive approaches. For instance, David Sloan Wilson's Darwin's Cathedral was important inspiration for me to pick up this. And what was interesting in this approach is that they were entertained, or they were cultivated by persons who come outside of biblical studies. So the decision was that do I or do we just want to keep a critical stance and say that, okay, now you are trying to say something about early Christianity, but there is this and that you would have to take into account, and so on, and just stay far from that. Or then the other option is that, okay, if you think that there is something that could be done better, just to enter the field and try to say it yourself if you think that, or we think that there is something that we can contribute to this field.
Yeah, that makes totally sense, that we don't only borrow things from others, but we actually try to take part in the conversation. Thanks a lot for these insights, Petri. I'm glad that Petri's team members are also here and willing to tell us about their experiences as part of this research group. Let's begin with introducing all the members, including their career stages and topics of research.
Hi, I'm Nina Nikki, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in Petri's project, and my topic is the cultural evolution of Pauline Christianity in the first 3 centuries.
My name is Pasi Hyytiäinen. I'm a doctoral student in this project, I'm studying the textual history of Acts by using different computer-assisted methods, such as phylogenetic methods. And actually, these phylogenetic methods were originally developed for analyzing the biological evolution, but I'm using these applications in order to analyze the evolution of texts.
Hey, I'm Antti Vanhoja, and my PhD project is about social identity construction in the pseudo-Clementine basic writing.
My name is Jarkko Wikman. I'm a second-year doctoral student working my thesis on the evolution of religious expertise in Ephesus. And my source material is inscriptional texts.
Thanks, great to have all of you here today. In the humanities, scholars are often known for their solitary work and the aim to develop one's own ideas. Petri, how does your project challenge this idea of solitary research? What do you do together with your team and why?
Well, I would say that we have a long tradition in Helsinki in biblical studies to work in groups. We have had several research projects, and I think that always the benefit is that several persons are working on on similar topics, and then they learn from each other. At least I have learned quite a lot from these other members of the project.
Let's turn back now to the team members. Could you tell us some examples of the added value that this project has brought to your academic careers so far?
As for myself, I feel the main advantage has been to get to know and to work with a very fresh and exciting new theoretical approach, and also one that offers or provides very promising pathways between humanities and natural sciences. So we're not restricted to the traditional exegetical work, but we're actually breaking the mold and doing something much wider and interdisciplinary.
The notion of evolution, or this evolutionary perspective, has led me to these kind of phylogenetic methods. And as I said, these are this kind of computer-assisted methods. And this led me to think that, okay, we have these applications, and I found some problems with these applications, and started to think whether it would be possible for me to code or program my own applications. And this led me to learn how to program. And now I am in the middle of in process of developing my own applications in order to execute my stemmatic or my textual evolutionary analysis. And so I don't think that if we wouldn't have this kind of evolutionary perspective, I wouldn't know how to program now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, my PhD thesis deals with social psychological theories, and I think being a part of this project has really broadened my perspective and shown the connections between cultural evolution and social psychological theories.
I did my master's thesis on literary methods and biblical interpretation, and now I'm becoming a historian with a cognitive approach. So the leap is quite a big one for me. Also, the cognitive approach has taught me that there are several other things than purely the logical consistency of religious tradition that needs to be taken into account when looking the traditional developments.
Thank you very much for very interesting examples of how working in a research group can change one's work and even way of approaching our field and its key issues. It takes a long time to plan a project, and international networks are helpful at that stage. Collaboration also continues during the project, especially with the advisory board. One of the members of Petri's board is here today, Professor Armin Geertz from Aarhus University. You are known as one of the key developers of the cognitive science of religion. You will give a talk here in Helsinki titled Brain, Body and Behavior, a Biocultural Approach to Religious Minds. What do you mean with biocultural approach, and why is that important?
It's important because the cognitive revolution that hit the humanities and the study of religion in 1990 was very much inspired by earlier cognitive approaches that understand human cognition as consisting of mental representations that work like logical mathematical formulas and are thus easy to apply in computer studies. And when we in Aarhus in Denmark at my research unit, the Religion, Cognition and Culture Research Unit, also became inspired by this movement. We noted that the idea was that mental representations were somehow causing everything we see around us. And in a way, it's right. But what we're arguing is that it's a two-way road, and that experiments have shown that a lot of the results are based on what we call fast cognition. You have to reply to some kind of a test within seconds or even milliseconds, and these are supposed to reveal mechanisms of human cognition. But we are arguing that, together with others in the world, especially neuropsychologist Merlin Donald, that there's also a slow cognition, and this is something that we spend a lot of time on, most of our time and most of our cognitive resources, because we have evolved as creatures in networks, in cultural and social networks. And so it's very difficult to distinguish between individual cognitive representations and collective cultural social norms. And so we work with a causal understanding of top-down pressures based on common norms and values, and bottom-up, which is not only cognitive but also embodied. So we're part of the new movement at the moment called the 4E movement, which sees cognition as embodied and embedded and inactive and so on. So it's focusing on our context. Our cognition does not function by itself. It's within a context. So we call it biocultural as a kind of a quick term to cover all of these aspects. Humans are very complex creatures, but we also share many of our propensities with other animals. And so the big problem is trying to decide where is it particularly human in relationship, for example, to chimpanzees or other creatures that also have who also are cognizing beings, and many of the experiments that we can see in cognitive studies are perhaps bringing forth aspects that other animals have as well. So what is it that's particularly human about human cognition? And that certainly is culture, language, and as well as this exuding of our inner worlds to the outer worlds, buildings and pictures and statues and other material objects that help us in our understanding of the world and have a decided influence on our cognition. So that's basically what we're arguing.
Very fascinating pioneering. What is the significance of evolutionary or cultural evolutionary perspective in the study of religions in general?
Yes, the interesting thing is that the cognitive science of religion, all the major hypotheses of the cognitive science of religion are, in essence, evolutionary theories. It's about how religion arose and has been passed on from generation to generation. And most have focused on mental representations that are passed on through generations. But it focuses on an idea of evolution that is clearly related to biological evolution. And that's fine. But what we can see in the evolution of human societies and cultures is that as soon as we move away from the biological, I mean, we have evolved as biologically as creatures that have certain propensities and abilities, brains and bodies that do this or that, and we are subject to selective pressures in the environment, both the natural environment and the social environment. And the difference between our development, for example, and many other animals, is that we're trying to influence our own evolution. And this happens in many, many ways, and this requires a multi-level understanding of evolution. It's teleological. It's humans have a goal, and they try to develop social, or we try to develop social structures and institutions and so forth to deal with our problems. Like, for example, the transition from hunter-gatherers to city-states. It's not a jump. It's something that has happened through a long period of time, and it has to do with resources, it has to do with population pressures, it has to do with the need to reproduce, but also the need to produce, the need to structure, and so on. So we need to have a more nuanced understanding of evolution. And I am arguing that the cognitive science of religion also needs to follow along in what's going on. So group selection rather than selection at the gene level is highly relevant to our understanding of religion, how it arose, the role that it plays in societies, and it changes. Religion changes throughout history. So there are a lot of reasons why evolutionary approaches are important for us.
Armin Geertz, you are visiting Helsinki as a member of the advisory board of Petri's research project. What do you think is important to keep in mind when cultural evolutionary approach is applied to historical cases such as early Christianity?
I think it's incredibly important, and I'm so happy to be a part of this group. Because there are several reasons. One of the first reasons is that this interdisciplinary approach, where you find people from a variety of disciplines who are cooperating and trying to understand human cognition and human culture and societies. And a lot of what's being done in the cognitive science of religion is very technical, and it has to do with experiments, laboratory experiments. And we've been trying to encourage people to export laboratory experimental methodologies into the field. And this whole area is very interesting and exciting, but it's very difficult to find out how can the results, the hypotheses, the theories, and the results of these experiments, how can they be applied to historical fields? How can they help scholars in their exegetal studies of texts? And there are a limited number of hypotheses that are being used at the moment by historians of religions, theologians, people in history, and so on. And we need to get beyond this. We need to expand our understanding of cognition as, I mentioned, embodied and deeply enculturated and so on, which then will open up for people in the humanities, where the competence in culture and in the study of texts and so on is also very technical and highly competent. And it can happen through cooperation between people in these various disciplines, but it's important that theologians, historians show us the way. And this is what I consider this group to be, a pioneering group that's trying to struggle through the very difficult field of cognitive approaches, neuropsychological approaches, and so on, but also combining them with sociological approaches and historical approaches. And this is the only way forward. I've always argued that cognitive science of religion will remain an esoteric science until the larger fields in the humanities and in theology pick it up and see, wow, this is something we can use. It's going to help us understand our texts and the people who produce these texts, and will give us also insight into ourselves, into our own cultural and social evolution. So that's why I'm just so happy to be a part of this.
Yeah, thanks. This is a great chance to the community of biblical scholars as well. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us.
Welcome.
Now I'll give the final word to Antti Vanhoja, one of Petri's team members, who is organizing the EABS graduate workshop here in Finland in this April 2019.
Yeah, that's right. The EABS Graduate Symposium will be held in one of the research stations of the University of Helsinki, and it's going to be on April 12th till 14th. I participated last year, and I can warmly recommend applying, especially if you got interested in our project, because Professor Luomanen is one of the advisors there in the symposium. The deadline for papers is on March 3rd, and you can find all the information on the EABS website.